Hey everybody, I'm here with Trent Dunham of Dunham and Company, a good friend of Virtuous. And I just have a couple of quick hit questions that I think will be really valuable for our audience today. So Trent, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love what you guys are doing. I know you guys talk a lot about innovation. When you're talking to organizations about the importance of sort of setting up a solid infrastructure and getting ready to scale, what do you tell them? What are your kind of top pointers?
The first conversation is how, database management system is something we call the cardiovascular system of an organization. If that is not running, if it's not optimized, if it's not optimal, and if it doesn't serve your purposes, then all that money you're spending on growing the organization financially is not going to be worth the investment. We're going to probably be considering that poor stewardship. So the database management system, the tools you use to communicate digitally, especially, what are the places that we're integrating? Integrations are huge as it relates to infrastructure and the platforms that will serve you best and keep your staffing and overhead down as much as possible. So whether that be an email tool, that be your social media platforms, whether that be your database management system, your phone center, all those things working together to make your life easier. If we can address that up front, we win. When we start doing our outbound acquisition, et cetera, then that stuff is all in place and we can roll much smoother.
Okay, next question. If you've been around fundraising at all, you know that thanking a donor and being grateful is at the very root of generosity. So when you guys are talking to nonprofits about kind of coming up with a strategy for how to thank donors, what do you tell them?
Well, I like to kind of separate it into two buckets, what I call a low voltage strategy and a high voltage strategy. So your low voltage should be the things that you organizationally are doing that we would consider best practice any nonprofit organization. Do you receipt your donors? That's low voltage. You should send out a receipt. Should you send out a paper receipt to everyone who gives? Yes. In fact, we have data that can show a lift in overall revenue to your organization when you send a paper receipt to someone who gave digitally.
Yeah.
So should you be sending those out? Yes, but that's a low voltage strategy. And then we have a high voltage strategy. We consider, what do you do with your best donors, your most engaged donors, the ones who give monthly or the ones who are giving at a much higher level financially? What are those high voltage strategies that we use that we call variable reinforcement, for instance? So it's unpredictable, but it's surprise and delight. So are we handwritten notes? Is it occasionally, maybe if you're a content development organization, do you send them some of that content in CD or book form as a way to help show what you're doing as an organization, but also build into them as one of your donors? So I think having those two things clearly articulated, but you've got to start there by defining who sits in each bucket. So what are you organizationally defining as someone who would deserve a high voltage treatment versus low voltage? So that's kind of a place to start, and from there to build your strategy from.
Yeah. Okay, last one. We've talked a little bit about this, but there's some huge myths out there on aging donors, older donors, and millennial donors on both sides of the spectrum. So I know this is a big soapbox for you. So I'd love for you to kind of set the record straight in terms of how we should think about aging donors and millennial donors.
That's good. So before we even talk about them specifically, I think just to recognize and embrace the fact that giving is not generational, but that it's rather life phase. And so it's going to happen more. You're going to receive more donations from people who are in the phase of life where they do not have children in the home. They're not paying for college. They're at their highest peak earning years professionally. They have the highest level of discretionary income. And so that's obviously going to put you in that, on the very low end of that 55, but at your higher end on that 70, 75-year-old range of donor to your organization. So don't be frustrated if your average donor is 63, 65 years old. That's probably pretty normal, and actually you should embrace the fact that. But that doesn't mean we ignore millennials, and it doesn't mean we ignore the silent generation, the 75 years or older as well. What we see on both spectrums is that the silent generation, those 75 plus, we saw more online gifts than any other generation from that generation over the last 12 months, which is it is counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And then with the millennial generation, we actually did some research targeted and focused on millennial donors and what makes them unique. And what we found is that their attendance at religious services was number one, high. And number two, they actually gave more money, wanted to give more money to religious institutions than they did social justice organizations, which kind of turns on its head what you would normally think about millennial donors. So kind of keeping in mind that the things that you hear anecdotally aren't always true, and to try to verify that with actual data certainly helps.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. I love that research-driven approach, and that those myths are just perpetuated in every nonprofit, and just so kind of fundamentally not true and provable through data that it's, you know, it's fun to hear them dispelled that articulately. So Trent, just thank you so much for taking a few minutes to chat with us today. It's been a joy, and I look forward to doing it again.
All right, thanks, Gabe. Appreciate it.
Yeah.